Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
In our cloud security series, we are going to talk about Defender for Key Vault and API today. Before we get started, I wanted to touch base on what Azure Key Vault is, because you can't really defend something if you don't know what it is or you're not using it. So Key Vault is a cloud service that's hosted in Azure to securely store and manage sensitive information like API keys, passwords, certificates, and other cryptographic keys. There's really three key features to Azure Key Vault. Secrets management, which allows you to store and control access to tokens, passwords, certificates, API keys, and other secrets. This allows you to centralize all of that information and those secrets so that you lower the risk of any type of accidental leaks and ensure that sensitive information is not stored directly in application code. A lot of this is not necessarily like a password vault. A lot of people think maybe I can use this as a password vault. It's not really for that. It's really for application development and to programmatically retrieve things from a vault, similar to like another solution out there that I know a lot of programmers use, like HashiCorp, something like that. This is Microsoft's native secrets management within Azure. So programmatically retrieve that code so it's not stored directly in the code itself. There's also key management. It simplifies the creation and control of encryption keys used to encrypt your data. It supports both software and hardware security module protected keys. And then finally, certificates management. Azure Key Vault allows easy provisioning, management, and deployment of public and private TLS and SSL certificates. So any type of task that involves these TLS and SSL certs for enrollment or automatic renewal, Key Vault can handle that. One of the things that I have preached to customers is how they handle certificates for logging into Linux machines. A lot of times, the old way to do it was just using a root password. That's really bad, obviously, as well as if you're generating a TLS cert, sometimes you store the root certificate locally. That's okay if it's like a lab or you're testing, but for production systems, you definitely don't want your developers having that certificate locally on their machine. One, it's bad in general for security practices, but two, if they leave, now they still have access to that and you have to rotate those certs, and that can be a pain. And so storing those certificates within an R-backed cloud service, Key Vault, is a great way to keep that stuff secure.
And we use this in Microsoft. By the way, Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. As we always say on the show, it is not sponsored or directed or funded by Microsoft. We do it on our own time and our own dime. But we do use Azure Key Vault at Microsoft. In fact, we are using the hardware security modules to do some of our Entra key storage and rotation moving forward as well. So we certainly are, quote unquote, eating our own dog food in terms of leveraging this to secure Microsoft, to secure Azure, and all of the underlying services as well. So it's something we definitely use and are investing in to make sure that it meets our needs and should hopefully meet the needs of all our customers as well. And before we even get to Defender for Key Vault, this is, of course, a security solution in and of itself. Using Key Vault enhances your security posture. You should use it. You should not have secrets in code. You should be scanning for secrets in code. You should be encouraging your developers to use a centralized vaulting source for all your secrets, so on and so forth. So if you're not using one today, we think that's a pretty good one and one option of many. Andy mentioned a competitor as well.
Yeah, there are competitors out there. And so if you do end up using the Key Vault solution, one of the differentiations between Microsoft and something else could possibly be the securing of the Key Vault. Most other third-party tools, they secure things through the identity. which is important. You can secure it through MFA, you can secure it through other things. But with Microsoft, you have not only identity, but then also device management that's integrated so you can have compliant devices. And then we have this solution called Defender for Key Vault, which is very simple to deploy. It is literally a toggle switch. If you're using Key Vault, highly recommend you just turn it on. I actually don't know how much it costs, but for most of these workload ones, it really depends on how many secrets and how many certificates and so on and so forth that you have in there, and probably access to them and how often it's accessed. But usually they're fairly cost effective. And so what Defender for Key Vault does is it's just Azure native advanced threat protection that's built in that gives you another layer of security intelligence. It will detect unusual and potentially harmful attempts to access or exploit Key Vault accounts. And so it's really about looking at who is accessing, where they're accessing it from, and when there is any type of anomalous activities that are occurring, Defender for Key Vault will show you an alert, and you can also have it send an email to your admins or your SOC, and it'll include the details of the suspicious activity and any type of recommendations on how to investigate it. So it's a fairly simple solution. If you're using Key Vault, I highly recommend that you just turn it on, because it will show you any type of threats that are geared towards accessing those secrets, those keys, and then any type of malicious activity that's attempting to use it as well.
Right. Andy, you made all the high points here. I'll just hit a couple of the highlights. Ease of deployment is critical here. It's flip a switch, and all key vaults in that subscription are now protected. You want to protect all your key vaults org-wide, and including new ones that are created even after you go through this effort. This is your easy button. The other thing is, obviously, Key Vault is a security solution in and of itself. Configuring it securely is, of course, required to get the full security benefit from it. However, secure configuration has a really hard time to account for things like anomalous activity, anomalous behavior, anything that's out of the normal behavioral baseline. And that really, I would say, is the number one takeaway from Defender for Key Vault. It's going to build a behavioral baseline for how your Key Vault is normally accessed and used. And anything that is outside of that behavioral baseline, think like UEBA, that's what it's doing. It's going to flag it and alert you to say, this is unusual. This is too many requests. These are requests from unusual systems or circumstances or times of day, so on and so forth. And then the other benefit of our solution is that the alerts are going to be prioritized, and they're going to be contextualized in a timeline with all the other alerts that are coming off. Instead of looking at an alert in a vacuum or in just a list that looks like the matrix, it's going to be in a timeline correlated into an incident and presented with relevant context in the broader sense of the attack, because an attacker is not hitting your Key Vault without having breached an identity or another system to gain that movement to hit the Key Vault. And so getting that context all in line, super valuable and super important to do an effective investigation. I will say one last note. I don't know what it costs either, but I will say my perception is it's not like expensive, and expensive in the terms of where the costs are not commensurate with the benefit received. I believe it's very, to Andy's point, cost effective. I've never looked at a customer and been like, oh my gosh, you're spending so much on Defender for Key Vault. That's crazy. Can say I've never had that experience. So I think it's mostly very effective, and certainly would be something we both recommend. And again, native protection, always better, because you don't have to do anything to take advantage of it. You flip a switch, it's on.
In general, kind of a little bit of inside baseball when it comes to how much it costs for the infrastructure versus the security to secure it. Most of the time, the cost of the security portion of it is anywhere between 5 to maybe at most that I've ever seen 30% of the cost of the infrastructure itself. So if you're using Key Vault, let's say it costs $100, usually the cost of the Defender or the security portion is anywhere from 5 to maybe 30 at most to secure that. So, and that's like monthly. That's a generalization across the board. But from what I've seen, looking at different customers, how much they spend on infrastructure versus how much they spend on the security, it's generally a minimal cost. And that's what I would assume here, without diving too deep into it.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting transition to our next subject, because I believe it is one of the few where that ratio is inverted. You can obviously price it out for yourself as we get into Defender for API, but since we're already on the subject, I'll just say my understanding is Defender for API tends to cost more than API management. I will say the reason why is because it does a lot, and API is a fast growing and significant threat vector. So it's important to protect it, and that requires kind of a significant effort to do that. In fact, the defense of APIs can be more involved in creating the APIs themselves, which let's unpack that now.
Yeah, so if you are using Azure API management, it's usually pretty easy to create an API. And then I think because of how APIs are used, how many times they're called and where they're called from and different IP addresses, that the defense can be difficult. And so we have, again, a native solution that's built into Azure called Defender for API that'll help you gain some visibility into it. You can investigate and improve your API security posture, prioritize vulnerability fixes, and then react to any type of real-time threats. The availability for this is something that you can tag on to any type of premium, standard, basic, or developer tiers of Azure API management. For API gateways, it is only for Azure API management. It doesn't support any third-party ones. Defender for API also doesn't support APIs that are exposed using API management self-hosted gateways or using other API management workspaces. And the types of APIs, currently it is for discovering and analyzing REST APIs within the Azure API management. What you can do with Defender for API is, number one, you can inventory a single dashboard to get a single pane of glass, if you will, of all of your managed APIs. You also get security findings, including information about external, unused, or unauthenticated APIs. So huge on visibility. And as I always say, the foundation of everything that we do first comes from visibility and inventory. If you don't even know what you have, how are you able to defend it? And so you're able to look at all of these and then review any type of security recommendations as part of this to help you improve the security API posture and harden any at-risk surfaces. One of the things that I think is just, again, a huge differentiator for Microsoft is if you are going down that data security path and you start scoping and knowing where your sensitive information lives, and you're doing that on the M365 side, and you have sensitive information types, including custom ones and labels, this will flow over to the API portion of Azure. So you are able to classify APIs based on sensitive data and prioritize any type of risk that might pose. And so I think that's huge. The integration between the Purview side into just, if you know that there's sensitive information that's getting access or flowing through these APIs, that you have insight and visibility into that.
Yeah, I agree. Huge benefit here. As we have learned from many years now, data security is hard, and organizations struggle to prioritize it and get it done and get the buy-in across the board you need to be successful with it. So helping that work, that time investment in standing that up, pay more dividends in more places, helps justify it. When I go through that effort to build my classification taxonomy in Microsoft Purview, and now I've configured sensitive information types that are unique to my business, and other solutions can then leverage that and start surfacing those, even APIs that may be responding with sensitive data. That's really a force multiplier, where it's taking the work I've already done and helping me reuse it in more places without requiring more rework or rebuilding it. So that's really, really an incredible benefit. And then when you know what's sensitive, it can help with your risk prioritization, where the alerts that come from these APIs that do respond with sensitive data are going to be prioritized in any investigation because, again, they could potentially leak the most sensitive data. So we want to take care of it first. So that's really beneficial in a lot of ways. It's beneficial from it getting more value from your time investment. It's beneficial from improving your prioritization when you respond. And ultimately, it delivers a better security posture for your organization. So all wins just by integrating that. Pretty significant.
Mm-hmm. You also get threat detection as part of it. So you're able to monitor it for anomalies, detection, using machine learning and rule-based analytics. It includes threats from the OWASP API top 10 critical threats. If you're using Defender Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM, it'll integrate the Cloud Security Graph into the Defender for Cloud Security Posture Management for API visibility and risk assessment across your entire organization. And like we mentioned before, like it'll also look at just security recommendations in general to help you shore up your API security. And if you have a SIM, you can export these alerts and events to your SIM as well. So there's SIM integration. But, as I was doing the show notes for this episode, I just went and looked to see what else was on the market for API security. And there isn't a whole lot,
A lot of startups.
A lot of startups. AWS is, of course, one of Microsoft's biggest competitors when it comes to cloud infrastructure. And they don't have anything specific like this that's built in. They have API security that is, it'll send you some things as part of their cloud trail, but nothing like a specific defense for it. So especially when it comes to, the data classification and the securing of sensitive information, I think there's not a whole lot of competition. So if you are using Azure API management, this is a no-brainer. Just like any other workloads that are in Azure, when you want to defend it, it's a one-click configuration. You just turn it on and it will start sending you alerts and security recommendations for your APIs. If you're not using Azure API management, maybe that's something to think about transitioning, because it is a better way to secure your APIs and have visibility on them, in my opinion. But, if you're not, I hope that there is another way that you think about API security, because it is a huge threat vector that we are seeing in the industry, and it's something that attackers are taking advantage of.
Yeah, and growing for sure. I'm kind of glad you chose these two defenders for this week's episode in our cloud security series, because there's quite a bit of contrast between them. Defender for Key Vault, relatively straightforward, and it does provide a benefit. We mentioned it's cost effective, but it's mostly doing, again, that kind of UEBA. So creating a behavioral baseline of what's normal behavior in Key Vault, and then identifying anomalous behavior in Key Vault. But look at what all Defender for API is doing comparatively. Building an inventory, giving you that holistic view of all your APIs, delivering API security posture management effectively, giving you coaching on how to harden and secure APIs that might be accessible without authentication or might be externally facing, tying in data classification and using that to enrich alerts and prioritization. Then doing that threat protection with not just behavioral based anomaly detection, but also more rule based. That's the word I was looking for. Rule based analytics as well. So, and mapping that to the OWASP top 10, which is always a great way to focus on what we're seeing right now. What are the top 10 threats today? And making sure we have protection for those. And then integration across the stack, integration in Defender CSPM, integration in the Azure API Management Portal, which may not be a place where security folks live, but the folks who are standing up new APIs, who are working with APIs, they live there. And so if the security recommendations are there and the alerts are there, that helps the folks who are working with it day to day also make better choices. It turns it from, oh, well, it's security's job to come in and secure this and clean it up, to it's everyone's job. And that's really beneficial too. So there's a lot of meat on the bone here. And so you can understand my comments at the top why the cost for this compared to the resources it's protecting may be slightly inverted, in that Defender for API, I believe, actually can cost more than API management, but you can see there's a lot of value here and a lot of risk inherent in the underlying system without bringing some additional security to it. So certainly worth looking at as well. And Andy hit all the highlights again, that the ease of deployment, the confidence in knowing that future APIs as they're deployed are automatically protected. That's always key as well. I love that deployment model where I map it to a subscription and I know everything built in that subscription moving forward of that resource type is automatically protected and I don't have to do anything. And nor do the developers have to do anything or anyone building those resources, because the protection is at a system level, like it's built into the platform.
Well, that was a great episode on how to secure secrets and keys and certificates as well as APIs. And so if you are following along with this cloud security series, we have several, from VMs to storage and so on and so forth. So keep up on it. We'll have a few more to round it out, to finish it out. But this was a great episode on more specific things. If you are doing application development, you're hosting infrastructure in the cloud, how to secure that. That's our episode for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.